Russian ballet is a form of ballet characteristic of or originating from Russia. Imperial Russian ballet. Until 1689, ballet in Russia was non-existent. The Tsarist control and isolationism in Russia allowed for little influence from the West. While the West went through the revolutions of a Euro-Oev Reformation, the Renaissance, and Science, Euro-Russia remained cut off and bound up in the timeless liturgies of the Orthodox faith. Euro. It wasn't until the rise of Peter the Great that Russian society opened up to the West. St. Petersburg was erected to embrace the West and compete against Moscow, a Euro-unregistered trademark-s backwardness. Yet the challenge to become a Euro-European Euro collided with the reality of Russian isolationism, a Euro in striking contrast to their West European counterparts. The Russian elite lived unadorned lives, in wooden houses and slept on benches, and their clothing and manners resembled those of peasants, rough and indecorous. Men coveted long and bushy black beards, which they took to be a sign of godliness and masculinity. Only demons were depicted as clean-shaven. Fancy foreign dress was prohibited, and foreigners living in Moscow were quarantined in their own Euro-German suburb, a Euro-unregistered trademark, a ghetto of European culture coveted by a few and dismissed by most. Muscovite society was not society in any form recognizable in the West. Peter the Great created a new Russia which rivaled the society of the West with magnificent courts and palaces. His vision was not to bring Russia to the West, but to bring the West to Russia. He created a court system like that in the West through legal edicts and strict rules. In the West, art was an evidence of cultural freedom, but in Russia it was a deliberately controlled expression and advancement. A Euro-OE, the rules were carefully laid out in the Honorable Mirror of Youth, a compilation of Western courtesy books designed to educate courtiers in the intricacies of refined behavior, including dancing. A Euro-classical ballet entered the realm of Russia not as entertainment, but as a Euro, a standard of physical comportment to be emulated and internalized, an idealized way of behaving. A Euro, the aim wasn't a Euro-unregistered trademark to entertain the masses of Russians, but to create a cultivated and new Russian people. In the early 19th century, the theaters were opened up to anyone who could afford a ticket. A seating section called a rayok, or Paradise Gallery, consisted of simple wooden benches. This allowed non-wealthy people access to the ballet, because tickets in this section were inexpensive. One author describes the Imperial Ballet as a Euro unlike that of any other country in the world. A Euro, the most prestigious of the ballet troupes were those attached to the state-supported theaters. The directors of these companies were personally appointed by the Tsar, and all the dancers were, in a sense, imperial servants. In the theater, the men in the audience always remained standing until the Tsar entered his box and, out of respect, after the performance they remained in their places until he had departed. Curtain calls were arranged according to a strict pattern. First, the ballerina bowed to the Tsar Euro unregistered trademark-s box, then to that of the theater director, and finally to the general public. Ballets Russes. By the early 1900s, the Russian ballet went beyond its borders and infiltrated Paris. It had become its own force and was distinctly Russian, while still being embraced by the Parisian society. In 1903, Ivan Cluston, a Russian dancer and choreographer who had started his career at the Bolshoi Theatre, was appointed more registered trademark de ballet at the Paris Opera. Cluston's hiring promoted a frenzy of questions about his nationality and choreographic agenda. A Euro, his hiring was thought a direct attempt by the opera to imitate the Russian company. Even he thought as much, maintaining, not without despondency, that inspiration too often came from the North, a Euro revolution. A method that people often apply in the country of the Tsars. A Euro unregistered trademark. Cluston, although acknowledging his nationality with pride, harbored none of the revolutionary intentions that some thought an inevitable consequence of being Russian. A Euro, the Parisians, while denying adoption of the backwards Russian troupe, had distinct Russian influence in their theatre. A Euro, despite Cluston a Euro unregistered trademark-s protestations, several features of the opera. A Euro unregistered trademark-s post-1909 ballets, along with its institutional conventions and balletic policy, appeared to betray a Russian influence. A Euro, the stigma of Russian brutality and force was applied even in Paris. While their style was being not only accepted in Paris, but implemented in Paris theatres the ballets russes were still considered dangerous, even in the theatre of performing art. The ballets russes, at base, became a metaphor for invasion, an eternal force that could engulf and control, could penetrate the membrane of French society, culture and even art itself. The embracing of Russian ballet in the Paris society became a point of contention, and French nationalism collided with Russian determination. Questions arose about the Russian intention in the Paris theatres under the title a cultural politiques including of delimitation of boundaries, the preservation of identity and the nature of relational engagements. Russia was incapable of simply bringing Russian culture to the West, but created a paranoia of intentions wherever they went. In the beginning, the relationship between Russia and France through the arts was a testimony to their political allegiances. French critics acknowledged a shared choreographic heritage. French ballet had migrated to Russia in the 19th century, only to return, decades later, under the guise of the ballets russes. The company, then, moored in a history that intertwined both nations, not only contributed to a cultural program of exchange. The ballets russes were a testament to Franco-Russian cooperation, goodwill and support. They represented un nouveau resserrement de la unregistered trademark alliance unregistered trademark However, the relationship made a negative turn when duplicity amongst the alliance arose. While Russia continued to borrow money from the French banks, with Russians no longer interested in supporting French culture and colonial politics. This duplicity gave fuel for the paranoia and lack of trust we see in the relationship concerning the arts. The Parisian press spoke of the ballets russes in terms of both enchantment unregistered trademark, bouleversement unregistered trademark and fantasia unregistered trademark. Yet they also invoked metaphors of invasion, describing the Campania unregistered trademark as Parisian presence in terms of assault unregistered trademark and conquête unregistered trademark. The dual-faceted relationship can be seen in this expression of both enrapture and contention. One French journalist, Maurice Lefebvre, called on his fellow Parisian unregistered trademark s to see the reality of the Russian invasion as though it were an infestation. We need to do some soul-searching and ask whether our guests are not about to become our masters. To imply that Russia was about to take over France through performing arts seems to be irrational, but evidence would suggest the fears were real among those in Paris. Ballet companies. The first ballet company was the Imperial School of Ballet in St. Petersburg in the 1740s. Sergei Diaghilev, an enormously important figure in the Russian ballet scene, founded the ballet company Ballets Russes in the 1909. He headquartered his ballet company in Paris, France. A proto-copyright copyright of Diaghilev, George Balanchine, founded the New York City Ballet in 1948. Today, the Kirov Ballet Company and the Bolshoi Company are two world-renowned Russian ballet companies that tour the world. Mariinsky Ballet, Bolshoi Ballet. Other Russian ballet companies include Ballets Russes, founded in 1909, Moscow State Academy of Choreography, commonly known as the Bolshoi Ballet Academy, founded in 1773, Vaganova Academy of Russian Ballet, founded in 1738 as the Imperial Ballet School, St. Petersburg Eifman Ballet, founded in 1977, Mikhailovsky Theatre Ballet, founded in the 1930s, Perm Theatre Ballet, founded in 1896, Novosibirsk Theatre Ballet, founded in 1945, Russian State Ballet of Siberia, founded in 1978, the Olyagov Dance Theatre, founded in 1994. A number of companies have been called, or included in their name, Moscow Ballet. Methods. Several methods exist in Russian ballet. The most widely used is the Vaganova method, named after the ballerina and teacher, Agrippina Vaganova. Notable dancers. Many Russian dancers have gone on to reach worldwide acclaim. Notable Russian dancers include notable Russian ballets, The Pharaoh's Daughter, The Little Humpbacked Horse, Le Roi Kandal, Don Quixote, La Bayadere, The Sleeping Beauty, The Nutcracker, The Awakening of Flora, Swan Lake, Raymonda, Harlequinade, Romeo and Juliet, Cinderella. See also, Mariinsky Ballet, Bolshoi Ballet, Vaganova Method, the New York Ballet Institute, Glossary of Ballet Terms. References. Bibliography, Anderson, Jack. Ballet and Modern Dance, A Concise History. New Jersey, Princeton Book Company. Caddy, Davinia. The Ballets Russes and Beyond, Music and Dance in Belle Époque Paris. Cambridge, Cambridge University Press. Curtis, Glenn E., ed. Russia, A Country Study. Washington, GPO for the Library of Congress. Homans, Jennifer. Apollo's Angels, A History of Ballet. New York, Random House. Rozhlavleva, Natalia. Era of the Russian Ballet, New York, E.P. Dutton and Company, Incorporated. Willis Arno, Peggy Agrippina Vaganova, Her Place in the History of Ballet and Her Impact on the Future of Classical Dance, Lewiston, New York, Edwin Mellen Press. External links, Russian Ballet Company, the Pennsylvania Academy of Ballet, a Vaganova Method School, BBT School of Russian American Ballet in Brooklyn, New York, USA, the Russian Ballet Academy of Indiana, a professional Vaganova Method School, Russian Ballet Today, Who's Who in Russian Ballet, a professional community website with discussions, video channel, photos etc.